And I apologize if that becomes a bit confusing, but what I want to do is try and show from a base zero of information, building up with different sites, bringing in different information so that we can build a picture or a biography of some of the occupants. Not going to even try and cover all of them because there's just too many, but I've picked out a few which help to demonstrate the processes. What I also have done is I've said that at the end, and this is time permitting, at the end, if there's anyone who wants me to try and show them, if they have specific questions about trying to research a soldier or a sailor from the First World War period, I'll try and help to point them in the right direction. Okay, so having said all of that, here we go. So I'm going to go on to share screen, and it should be this one. Right, so I've got a number of screens open here, which I'm going to be using. I'm also going to be bringing in at some stages images that I've saved and are up on my OneDrive. It just saves me having to jump out and unshare and reshare. So the process that I went through whenever I started researching these men, just going to move that out of the way. The process I went through was to start with the Belfast street directories, and I didn't pre-open one of these. Belfast street directories are available online through a website called Lennon Wiley. Great website. The different Belfast street directories have been transcribed, but as you can see from the area in the middle there, it's not every year that's been transcribed. So there are jumps. And unfortunately, for what we're doing, looking at the Cregagh Colony, it was built in 1925, first started appearing on the 1926 street directories. They're not included. But it is useful for general purposes. If you're trying to track a family from where they lived, you can jump forward from 1900 to 1907 and so forth. And that way you can build up a picture of where the families lived. The Belfast street directories themselves, and there was one per year produced, and they would be produced. So, for example, the one in 1924, the information would have been collated in 1923, and so forth. So, if they're not on Lennon Wiley, what you can do, when we're out of lockdown, is physical copies of the Belfast street directories for just about every year are held either at the Lennon Hall Library on the second floor or on the second floor of the Belfast Central Library. And you can go in and you can take out 5 at a time or whatever. And that way you can try and follow somebody through the different street directories. So this is the street directory for Somme Drive in 1926. And as I mentioned last week, as you can see, there's only one occupant. 2 to 16 was vacant, 1 to 21 was vacant, and there was one person occupying number 18. When we go through to the next year, you can see that Somme Drive, all the houses are now occupied. And you can see that most of the men that lived in them were labourers. But there's a few like joiners, a clerk, tram inspector, customs, which is probably means is a variant of civil servant, electrician, shipwright, so he probably worked in Harrington Wolff or workman clerk, member of a sergeant in the RUC, and a plumber and an engineer. So you're getting a mix, but by and large, most of the men would have been manual workers, whether manual workers at the base level or skilled manual workers, but by and large, they would have been manual workers. So the Belfast Street Directory is useful because it gives you the man's surname, his forename, and his occupation, which from a general point of view is useful. But from the point of view of trying to track back in terms of military records, it might be less useful. And also, most of the records, military records, do not contain addresses. But the ones which do contain addresses would obviously have their pre-war or wartime, or the house where they lived just after they were discharged. So the records from 1926 are not going to be particularly helpful. So how did I go from the Belfast street directories to researching? The next step which I took was to build up a record using the online facility of who the occupants were 1926, 1932, 1939, 43, 51, and 60. That means if I saw a name dropping out, it would indicate that the likelihood was that the man died at some stage during that period, especially if the new occupant was Mrs. whatever. So for example, looking at William Burke, if you got to 1951 and found that it was Mrs. Burke, then the indication would be that sometime between 1943 and 1951, William Burke had died. That means whenever you're looking to see exactly when he died, you've got a narrower field of narrower time field to look at. And with some more common names, that's very useful. One approach would be to pick out all the unusual names, names which aren't that familiar. I'm going to show you one of those later on. So that could be somebody like Thomas Snowden, not a particularly common name in Northern Ireland, or Samuel Spears. Of course, with Samuel Spears, you've got at least two other variant spellings, because it could be S-P-E-E-R-S, S-P-E-A-R-S, S-P-E-I-R-S, as well as S-P-I-E-R-S. So again, you need to be aware of variant spellings of different surnames. That would be a bit risky, just dipping in and picking a name and looking for that surname. And it would have to be then verified against other sources. So you can't just go in and say, right, I'm going to look for Fred Kershaw. You find a Fred Kershaw and then assume this must be the right man. You need to double check and you need to cross check. A second approach would be to go onto the Belfast City Council Burial Records website and just play potluck. And again, that would require cross-checking. But if you take it, as I'm going to try and show you through, in a rational way, you will see how the information can be built up. The other option would be, if you were wanting to build up a picture of the whole of the Cregagh Colony, would be to speak to people who are related to the original owners, original occupants. And that worked very well when I was looking at Adam Hamilton, the first occupant of number 26, through talking to his son Reggie and seeing some of Reggie's memorabilia, especially his service medals. So with Reggie, because of the way, because he had the medals which gave his father's regiment, I knew that there would be a fairly good chance of me finding him on the World War I or First World War service records that are held on Ancestry. Now, for both the service records and for the discharge records, you have to bear in mind that these were held for the whole of the British Army. Other ranks were held in London. And during the Second World War, when the Germans bombed London, the vast majority of these records were lost, and those that survived were badly damaged through either fire or smoke damage or water damage. So you'll see black marks where they've been burnt, and some of them will be faint because the water has got into them and it's just leached out some of the information. With Adam Hamilton, we're very fortunate because there is a relatively complete, but also a relatively undamaged. So when you're on this service, this facility, my recommendation would be that you search for forename and surname. If you know for certain where he was born, you can put in the birth location. I would advise against, even if you know the exact date of birth, I would advise against putting it in, because we know from experience that many men lied about their ages when they enlisted. Some lied to make themselves appear older, and others lied to make themselves appear younger. Indeed, for research that I was doing just earlier on this week, I was looking at a guy who enlisted with the New Zealand Expeditionary Force. He gave his date of birth as, I can't remember exactly, but let's say it was the 26th of February 1872. In actual fact, he was born on that day and month, but in 1868. So he had made himself appear 4 years younger because he was maybe concerned that he was at an age where he might be rejected for military service. The only other thing which I would normally put in here would be the regiment name. So we know from Reggie Hamilton's, from the medals, we know that his father served with the Royal Irish Rifles. And it'll do its research. And there you can see the first one coming up, surprise, surprise, is Adam Hamilton. And this is what his service record would look like when you're on Ancestry. This record is also available on Find My Past and probably in some other areas. So you can see it is fairly good quality. But rather than going through each of the pages here, because there's duplications, there are also blank pages. For some reason, whenever they were having these documents scanned, somebody decided to scan both sides of each page, even if the reverse side was totally blank. So you get a lot of superfluous pages. What I have done is I've downloaded the pages and I'm going to go through them using the downloaded versions. So this is the first page of his attestation. Adam Hamilton, you've got his service number 17782. You've got his regiment, Royal Irish Rifles. You've got that he was in the YCB before the war and that he was then went into the 14th Battalion. It gives you the parish and townland and the county where he was born. You've got recorded his age as he provided it, which may or may not be accurate. And you've got his trade or occupation, in this case, labourer. Later on, we'll see that he qualifies what type of labourer he was. Going down to the bottom, it gives the date that he enlisted. So he enlisted in Belfast on the 14th September 1914. So basically 6 weeks after the start of the war and after the decision by Carson and Craig to make the Ulster Volunteer Force available to the British Army. The second page is possibly more interesting because it gives us a description of Adam. He was 6 feet and half an inch tall, which for that time, for that period in history, is really quite large, quite tall. Where a lot of the records I've seen, men going into the Royal Irish Rifles tended to be around about 5 foot 5 inches. So men were generally smaller, shorter than the norm for today. He weighed 54 pounds, and his chest measurement was 38. It tells us that he had a ruddy complexion, his eyes were blue, and his hair was brown. It also gives his religious denomination, Presbyterian, although he doesn't appear on the rolls of honour for any of the Presbyterian congregations in Belfast. So it's possible that he was Presbyterian by affiliation, but not by attendance or membership. There's also a section where it gives any distinctive marks or anything like that. So he had a mole on the left side of his neck, but if a man had any tattoos, then they would be described. Why did they have this? Well, it meant that if the guy unfortunately was hit by a shell or stepped on a landmine or something, there would be some means of possibly identifying him. So they were identifying features, distinctive features that could help to identify him. This is another page, which is the military history sheet. At the top of this sheet, it will record, and again, you can see how this has been partially damaged and there's also bleeding through from the other side. But hopefully you'll be able to see it. And what this, in this section here, it would record the periods of service at home or with one of the expeditionary forces, in other words, overseas. So you can just about make out that Adam enlisted on the 14th September 1914. He was on home service, in other words, training, until the 1st of October 1915. He went to the Expeditionary Force in France on 2nd of October 1915, which was when the Ulster Division was deployed to the Western Front. And he was there until the 11th of August 1918. Now, this would include any short periods of home leave. But if he had been wounded, had come back to the UK for treatment, and then gone back to France or gone to another theatre of war, then you would see home, France, home, France. And then for Adam, he was home from the 12th of August 1918 to when he was discharged on the 13th of February 1919. It also gives you the years and days for each of those segments. So you can see that Adam Hamilton had 4 years, 153 days service whenever he was discharged. Moving further down, it would give it a summary of the campaigns in which he was involved, and also what medals he was entitled to. There's also a section where it has where the details of wounds could be recorded. And you can see GSW stands for gunshot wounds, and he had gunshot wounds to the neck on the 23rd of July 1918. Moving further down the page, it has the name and address of his next of kin. So his wife, Grace, of 100 Bristol Street, Belfast, but then there's also 37, and it's either Silvio Street or Silver Street. Again, because it's faint and the handwriting is not great, it makes it difficult. As he was a married man, it has details of his wedding, Grace Dempsey. They got married in St. Anne's, Belfast on the 2nd of August 1914. So basically the day after the war started, or sorry, a couple of days before the war broke out, Adam and Grace got married. It also gives you the name of the person who was performing the ceremony. Catherine was born their daughter was born on the 26th of January 1915, but we won't go into that. So that gives you quite a bit of personal information. Then we've got the likes of medical records. And in this case, Adam, after being wounded, was sent home for treatment in England, and at Fargo Hospital, which is in Wiltshire. In September 1918, he had an X-ray examination, and the notes say that the X-ray showed there was a ragged metal fragment deeply embedded in the muscles of the root of the tongue. Now, for anyone that's ever had mouth ulcers or a wound or something at the base of the tongue, you'll know how incredibly annoying it is. But to have a ragged fragment of metal embedded in the muscles of your tongue must have been very uncomfortable and probably quite painful. This provides this form here, which is part of the discharge process. Some information about his service overseas, but what I found particularly valuable for this exercise is the description by the man as to how the wound had affected him. Now he says, on or about 16th July, okay, we know it's 23rd July, when in the trenches, I was struck by shrapnel in my throat. I can now only eat soft food. My throat dries up when walking, and it keeps me coughing all the time. Sometimes I cannot speak very well. So obviously the piece of metal was embedded in his tongue had affected his speech facility. He was probably slurring his words, which could be interpreted by some people. If he was going for a job interview, it could be interpreted that he had been on the bottle already, and that could affect his likelihood of getting employment. Constantly coughing, throat drying up, it would have meant being in a workplace environment would have been more difficult for him. And this is a descriptive return of a soldier medically boarded before discharge or transferred to the reserve. So again, we've got the same basic information. He's now with the 3rd Royal Irish Rifles because he had been overseas. When he came home, he would have been transferred from a frontline battalion into one of the reserve battalions. This tells us that his age on discharge was 31. His occupation before enlistment was a stoker gas, which meant he worked for the gas board. And the nature and locality of employment desired was light employment in Belfast. It also gives us an address. So at the time of his discharge, he was living at 45 Fortingale Street, which is between off the Old Lodge Road, between the Old Lodge Road and Agnes Street. It also gives the name of the approved society. Now, in those days, because there was there's very little national insurance, national health service, most men belonged to a society, and he belonged to the Orange and Protestant Society. That's not a political or a religious organization. It's an employment society, so a bit like a trade union, I suppose. And another form, still giving his address as 47 Fortingale Street, but this is telling us he was transferred to the Class Z Reserve on the 13th of February 1919 at the age of 31. Now, the Class Z Reserve was for men who, if the peace negotiations that were ongoing in France had broken down and war had resumed, he would have been immediately recalled to active service. It also states that his degree of disablement was 40%, and that means that his ability to find suitable employment had been reduced by 40% due to his disability. The weekly pension was 11 shillings, and that was from the 14th of February 1919. And there was an allowance of 2 shillings and 8pence for Catherine the child. So from all of that information, we can build up a biography of Adam Hamilton. I'm just going to read out what I've got for him. Adam Hamilton was born at Ballyhartfield near Templepatrick on 21st January 1886 to Alexander Hamilton and Catherine Williamson. The family had moved to the Shankill area of Belfast by 1901. Adam was a labourer in the gasworks and living at Boodle Street when he married Grace Dempsey, and she was from Bristol Street. And they got married on 22nd August 1914 in St. Anne's Parish Church. Adam enlisted with the 14th Battalion Royal Irish Rifles on 14th September 1914 and was deployed to France in October 1915. He was admitted to 110th Field Ambulance on 17th June 1916, suffering from accidental burns to his left leg. In January 1918, there was a major restructuring of infantry regiments, and Adam was transferred to 2nd Battalion. He sustained gunshot wounds to the throat and neck on 23rd July 1918 and was admitted to number 62 Casualty Clearing Station the following day. He was transferred to a base hospital on 25th July and transported to the UK by hospital ship Brighton on the 11th of August. And he was treated at the Boscombe Hospital in Bournemouth. As he was no longer in a theatre of war, he was attached to the 3rd Battalion, a reserve for the Royal Irish Rifles. In September 1918, an X-ray taken at Fargo Military Hospital in Wiltshire revealed that a fragment of metal was embedded in the muscle at the base of his tongue, probably associated with the neck wound that he had suffered. The medical examination concluded that operating to remove the fragment represented a significant risk of greater damage being done. So basically, they left the piece of metal embedded in his tongue. He was living at Fortingale Street off the Old Lodge Road when he was discharged to the Class Z Reserve on 13th February 1919. And I should have said, this is Adam Hamilton's cottage at number 26 Piccadilly Avenue. A pension of 23 shillings in 1920. Sorry, lost my place here. He was awarded 40% disablement pension, and now it was at the rate of 16 shillings per week, plus an allowance of 7 shillings per week for one child. Catherine, who was born in 1915, a second daughter, Grace, was born in 1919. And from death records, death notices, we know that, as well as Reggie, there were 2 other sons born to Adam and Grace. Now, a pension of 23 shillings in 1920 would be the equivalent of 56 pounds per week in current terms. Adam Hamilton's name is recorded on the Belfast Corporation Gas Department Roll of Honour, which is located in Belfast City Hall. Adam died at Belfast City Hospital on 27th December 1954, aged 68, and Grace Hamilton died on 10th December 1975, aged 83. Adam and Grace are buried in Carnmoney Cemetery. I visited the cemetery yesterday, and sadly there's no headstone at the grave. So as we go through the rest of the evening, I'll show you where I got some of the other information from. But one of the key documents is the pensions, and unfortunately there's, I'm gonna, right. Yep, the pension ledgers. These only became available relatively recently, about 2, maybe 3 years ago. And this archive includes cards for men receiving a disablement pension and cards for next of kin receiving dependence pension. So I'm going to run a check that I've already pre-set, and that's for a guy called Andrew Henderson. Again, the only other piece of information I'm going to put in is his service number. So this is Andrew Henderson. I'll just bring up this record. So this is his. This is the dependence card for the dependents of Andrew Henderson, Royal Irish Rifles, 8th Battalion. He was a Lance Corporal, and he died on the 6th of 8, 1917, of wounds received in action. His widow was Sarah, and she lived at the fire station on Albert Bridge Road. So obviously before the war, Andrew Henderson was a fireman, and in those days, the firemen and their families lived on site. One of the most important factors on this particular form is, from anyone doing research, is that it lists all the children under the age of 16 when the pension was awarded. And it also gives the date of expiry. So whenever each child reached 16 years of age, the pension would be reduced slightly. But this is a fantastic resource for anyone who's doing genealogy, because it's giving the names of all the children, but also their dates of birth. And you can see there down at the very bottom, Gladys and Maud were both born on the 20th of June 1914, so just before the war started. But they're obviously twins. It gives the pension, which in this case is 36 shillings and threepence per week. And it gives the date from which that started. So this particular pension started on the 25th of February, 1918. So about 5 or 6 months after the man died. Going to go back and run the same or similar check for Adam Hamilton. This time, I'm not going to put in his regiment or his service number, even though we do know it. I'm just going to put in Belfast. So what this will do is it will return any men called Adam Hamilton where Belfast appears on the record, in other words, in the address. And surprise, surprise, Adam Hamilton is the first, or Adam Hamilton is the first one up. If you just spotted something there. So look at this pension card. Now, if you remember on the service record, it said that he was getting a pension of 11 shillings per week. So again, this document, it gives us the regiment and his number, his rank, and his date of discharge or transfer. So you can use all of that information to verify that you're looking at the right man. Gunshot wounds to the neck, and it states whether or not it was attributable to or aggravated by service. In this case, attributable to. The reason that's in there, you could have somebody who their disability was, say, bronchitis or tuberculosis. If their disability was tuberculosis, for example, and it was attributable to or aggravated by his service, then if that man died before the 31st of August, 1921, he would still be entitled to be regarded as a war fatality if he died of pulmonary tuberculosis, because that tuberculosis was either attributable to his war service or aggravated by his war service. So there is a process ongoing where names are still being added to the Commonwealth War Graves list of war fatalities for the Great War for 1914 onwards. And I myself have had, I think, something like 6 names added on to the Commonwealth War Graves list in probably the past year and a half. So there's a lot of men who have been overlooked because they'd been discharged and then they died of a condition attributable to or aggravated by war service, but there is still a process where those men can be properly recognised. The back of the form, that card, gives details of the pension that was awarded. So you can see in 1920 it was 40%, but he's now getting 16 shillings per week for himself, and he's getting 7 shillings per week for his wife and 1 child. The rate of the disablement has dropped in 1921 from being 40% to being 16 to 14%. So obviously there had something had happened. Possibly the metal fragment had eased itself out, as shrapnel sometimes does, or perhaps it had stopped having as big an effect on him. So that's the pension cards for both a man discharged, transferred, and also for a man who died during the war. Fantastic resource, and it's well worth getting access to them, if only to get details of where the man was living when he was discharged, and details of, for a man who died, wife and children. The next step in my process was to build up a record of the occupants, as I said, using the online street directories, because that would mean that I would be able to identify roughly when a man died. And it would also, if I knew when he died, then I could look for obituaries. An obituary or a death notice might have been placed by an old comrades association, so that would maybe enable me to find out what regiment or unit he had belonged to, and then you can work back from that. So I'm going to go back into the, so that's Reggie Hamilton's cottage. Right, this is the street directory for Albert Drive in 1927. And as you can see, the occupant of number 3 is Mrs. Ellen Scarlett. Now, it's very unusual to have a married woman as the occupant, the first occupant of a house. In fact, it shouldn't happen. So that immediately meant that I became interested in this particular record. Why was there an Ellen Scarlett, Mrs. Ellen Scarlett, listed as the householder? But bear in mind, this is the Belfast Street Directory. It's not the ex-servicemen's association's records. And basically, when the person called round to find out who lived at the house, Ellen was living there. Possibly her husband was elsewhere, maybe with work, maybe he was in hospital. So they've listed her as the occupant. But she remains as the occupant until 1943, when the occupant then is George F. Scarlett. So we now have two people with the surname Scarlett living at number 3 Albert Drive. We've got George and we've got Ellen. So we can make an assumption that George and Ellen were married. But for some reason, George had not been listed as the householder in previous street directories. So I'm going to go on to a totally free website, which is always good news for genealogists, irishgenealogy.ie. This website contains records of births, marriages, and deaths. There are church records, but I mainly use it for the civil records. Records for birth, marriages, and deaths across Ireland from middle of the 19th century right the way through to 1921. From 1921 onwards, it only contains records for the Irish Free State and then later the Republic of Ireland, because up until 1921, there was one general registrar's office for the whole of Ireland. When partition occurred, there were two offices created, one for the Irish Free State and one for Northern Ireland. In Northern Ireland, the General Records Office of Northern Ireland have an online system for searching for births, marriages, and deaths. But unlike this system, there is a charge. So you can use this to search, as I said, for birth, marriages, and deaths. So we're looking at this surname Scarlett. So I'm gonna put in just in the last name, Scarlett, and marriage. One of the annoying things about this is that you have to prove that you're not a robot, which I knew anyway. So you keep having, every so often you have to put in these details again. It's an annoyance, but it's worth it. So you can see we've got 169 Scarlett, people called Scarlett. We could bring that down by just searching for ones who were married in the 1900s. Still a lot of Scarletts, but you can see by a sheer miracle, the one that's at the top of the list is George Scarlett and Ellen Scarlett. If that happened, so I'm going to undo that to show you another way of finding them. So we've got 169 records. By using the Control F function, you can bring up a search box. If I then search for Ellen, well, there you go, it's the second one down, but that could just as easily have been the 169th record. So if you look at this record for George and Ellen Scarlett, you'll see they were married on the 29th of July, 1919. You can then look at an image of the death or of the marriage register. Now, whilst there would be individual certificates for every marriage, they also maintained a register which would have 4 marriages per page. And that can be downloaded using the download button. It downloads it as a PDF, and that is free. So you can see that on 29th July 1919, George Fleming Scarlett, remember in 1943, the occupant was George F. Scarlett. He was 28, and he married a woman called Ellen Scarlett. He was a soldier living at Lisbon Street, and she was living at Lisbon Street. So it's quite possible that after he was discharged, he was boarding with another stream of his family name. It also gives his father's name, John Scarlett, and his father's occupation, shoemaker. So all of that information can be used to track further back to find George Fleming, where he lived in 1911 and 1901, and where he was born and when he was born. It It also gives Ellen's father's details as William Scarlett, a carter. And it records that the marriage took place in St. Patrick's Church of Ireland in Ballymacarrat. So that's the church on the Newtonards Road. So there's another wee piece of information. We now know that both the bride and the groom had the surname Scarlett, which could mean that they were related, but far enough back that they didn't break the laws of consanguinity. Love that word. So we've now identified their marriage. So it records that George Fleming was 28 in 1919. So that would mean that he was round about 20, 19, 20 at the time of the census. So I'm going to go into the census form, census search facility. Again, it's another free resource. 1901 census there, 1911 census is there. You need to be careful when you're using the census. There are some aspects that it's worth mentioning. First, the transcriptions of the underlying documents was carried out in India. And as a result, a lot of transcriptional errors have crept in, especially relating to Irish names, either place names or surnames. And also bearing in mind that the handwriting on the original documents is sometimes a bit vague, and the transcribers have transcribed what they could see, but this has resulted in errors. So again, you need to be aware to search for variants and so forth. So if you're using this, be prepared to be frustrated and indeed angry. I'm going to run a search here for Gardner. Sorry, my phone's pinging. Gardner living at Woodstock. Now, when you're putting in a town, land, or street, you're advised, or I would advise you not to put in something like Woodstock Street or Woodstock Road, because it'll treat each of those as separate search criteria, and it'll return lots of other roads or streets which are not Woodstock. So again, it's simpler just to go with the details that you know of. So this search, when I do it, let's just take the top one. And it's telling us that these are the occupants of 14 in Woodstock Street. Now, it's very important to realize that that does not mean they lived at number 14 Woodstock Street. It's the 14th house in Woodstock Street that the enumerator called at. Under the View Census Images, Household Return, you can view the actual household return, but the front page of the household return will also give you the actual street address. So if I just bring that up in size, you can see number on form is 14, but the actual street address is 16 Woodstock Street. So it's always worth checking that. Another factor with the census is that you can use the wildcard system. So rather than putting in Gardiner with an I, if I put in an asterisk, which is a wildcard between the Gard and the NER, it will list out all the variant spellings of that. So when I run the search, you'll see we're still getting Gardner, but we're also getting Gardiner, Gardenr, and Gardiner. So if there's, especially with names like Smith, you can put in SM*TH, and it will find SMITH as well as SMYTH, but it'll also find SMEETH. So it's not perfect, but it can help where you've got unusual names. And that also works with the likes of MacDonald can be sometimes MC Donald or MAC Donald. So if you put in an asterisk between the M and the C, it will search for either of those variants. But what I want to look for is our friend George Scarlett. So I'm going to put in Scarlett, George, and because we know he should be round about 19 years old, we can put in 19 and it will search for 5 years either side of that. One of the other factors to be aware of with this, the census, especially if you're looking at 1901 and then 1911, sometimes the age in 1901 doesn't increase by 10 by 1911. So we've got 3 George Scarletts, but one is George Fleming Scarlett, which we know from the marriage register is the man we're looking at. So he was living at Carnfunnock, and he was a servant in the Chain household. Now, he was also a groom. When we look at the actual underlying form, you'll see, if I just bring that up in size, you can see that George Fleming Scarlett was a groom and domestic servant. So he looked after the horses as well as having domestic duties within the household. William Chain was a very wealthy and prominent man in the Larne area. He was a justice of the peace. He was, if I just bring up the show, all information will give you additional information as to the makeup of the household. So he's a JP, so he sat on court cases. He was a deputy lieutenant for County Antrim, which meant that he was in favour in terms of representing the monarch. He was a harbour owner, so he actually owned Larne Harbour, and he was also a ship owner. Very wealthy, very prominent man. He also sold land for the construction of ISSLT cottages for ex-servicemen in Larne. So we've got George Fleming. This also tells us that he was Church of Ireland, but it also tells us he was born in County Westmeath. So now we can look for a George Fleming Scarlett, age 10 in the 1901 census. So I go back to 1901, change the setting to 1901, and change the age to 10. We don't have a George Fleming, but we do have a George F, and he's living at Kiltoom in Killure in Westmeath. So we can be fairly assured that he is the right man. So now we have George F. Scarlett. He's the grandson of the head of the household, who's Mary Small. So if he's the grandson of Mary Small, that means his mother's maiden name must have been Small. So now we can search the genealogy for a George Scarlett, where he was born round about 1890, and where his mother's maiden name was Mary. We also know from the, sorry if I have to keep moving these things around. We also know from the civil records that George Fleming Scarlett's father was called John Scarlett, and he was a shoemaker. So now we can start to look for a man called George, or the birth record for George Scarlett, born around about 1890, and looking for somebody whose parents' details we already have. Because the census records, the age can be a couple of years out, I tend to do a 3-year gap. So because we think he's born in 1890, I'm allowing for it to be 1889 or 1891. Unfortunately enough, there's only one George Scarlett born in the whole of Ireland. Going through to his birth register entry, we find George Fleming Scarlett, son of John Scarlett, who is a shoemaker, and Kate Scarlett, whose maiden name was Small. He was born on the 20th of February 1891 at Kiltoon in Cool Registration District in Granard Main District in County Westmeath. So from going from having basically just a name or 2 names on a street directory, we now have quite a lot of information from him, about him, from his family point of view. But what about his Military records. What about his military information? Well, we can start with the medal records because, again, we're looking for George Scarlett. We don't know who he served with, but it's a relatively unusual name. So hopefully it won't turn up too many issues. He says, oh, having already done this. So when we look at this, we've got a George Fleming, and it lists that he was North Irish Horse, South Irish Horse, and Army Service Corps. And it gives his regimental numbers in each of those. So if I click on this, and then click on the image to see the actual medal index card. Right, the medal index card has South Irish Horse's number and Royal Army Service Corps. But up at the top it says, see George Scarlett N967 North Irish Horse. Doesn't have any record of medal entitlement. So I'm going to go back to the search results screen. And if we scroll down a bit, we have a G Scarlett North Irish Horse 967. So this has been linked to the other, the George F. Scarlett. And that linkage has been done by the military shortly after the end of the war. So this is his medal index card. It's telling us his regiment and number. It's telling us he deserted on the 6th of February 1918. But it's also telling us that he also served with the Royal Irish Fusiliers as 41497. And it tells us that his qualifying date was the 18th of December 1914, and that the theatre of war was number 1 theatre France, number 2 theatre is the Balkans, number 3 theatre is Egypt, and there are others. A lot of people, when they see qualifying date, assume that that was the date the man enlisted. It's not. It's the date the man first went to a theatre of war, and that is included so that they can determine what range of medals he's entitled to. For a man who had gone to France between the start of the war and the middle of November 1914, he would be entitled to the 1914 star. Anyone who went to a theatre of war between mid-November 1914 and the end of 1915 would be entitled to the 1914-15 star. And anyone who went to a theatre of war after that would only be entitled to the Victory Medal and the British War Medal. So this gives us a wee bit of information already. If we go to the World War I, or as this calls it, the Service Medals and Awards, and if we put in George Scarlett, right, we're getting quite a few here. So we need to backtrack, and we know that his service number, the last one, was 41497. Go away. So 41497. Right, this isn't working. Where it's not working properly. Oh, there he is there. He's down as G Scarlett, so for some reason they haven't recorded his forename. So the medal rolls gives us an additional piece of information. And where is our friend Scarlett? So again, we're getting the details of his desertion and so forth, and Royal Irish Fusiliers. But we're really looking for, so that gives us a bit more. So we know, or I know, and this can be easily found out, that in September 1917, the North Irish Horse, which was a cavalry regiment, was taken off the taken out of the cavalry and was split. Some men stayed with cavalry units, the hussars, but others were transferred into the infantry with the 9th Battalion Royal Irish Fusiliers. The South Irish Horse similarly was dismounted, and some of the men for that went into a battalion of the Royal Irish Regiment. We also know that he deserted in early 1918, and we know from the service, from the cards, that he then went on to serve with the South Irish Horse and in the Army Service Corps. So why did he desert? We can't say for certain because the records are not there, but my interpretation is that he had an affinity with horses, and he didn't like being infantry and stuck in the trenches. So he deserted from the Royal Irish Fusiliers, joined the South Irish Horse, and then went on to serve in the Royal Army Service Corps. Now, at that time, the Army Service Corps, a lot of the transportation they provided was horse-drawn. It wasn't motor vehicles. There were some, but it was mainly horse-drawn. So the fact that he continued to serve with other units which made use of horses leads me to think that he just didn't like being in the trenches and he liked working with horses. At least that's my interpretation. So we've got some of his military information. We know who he served with and so forth. So now we want to try and fill in a bit more about his history after he came home. Belfast City Council has a burial service where you can look up to see who's buried and where they're buried. Again, it's a free service, so that's always useful. It's one of the drawbacks to me is that you have to put in a surname or part of a surname. And sometimes if you don't know the spelling of the surname, that can be difficult. But because of the way it's set up, you can also just put in, for example, the letter, let's just go for letter A. And you can also search on here by the address where the man lived. So if we put in, oops, if I could spell. If we put in surname A and Somme, it will look for anyone with the surname beginning with A who was living at Somme Drive when he died. And there we've got 4 records. And you can see the last place of residence for Somme Drive. So that could be useful. So for doing this, you could look up, if you've got a list of all the people who were resident there in, say, 1932, you could go through each letter of the alphabet that's relevant and look for the relevant sort of street. And that would give you an indication of when the person died, if they're buried in one of the British or the Belfast City Council cemeteries. And it's not all Belfast City Council cemeteries either. This holds the records for Belfast City Cemetery, Dundonald Cemetery, Knock Burial Ground. It does not hold the records for Shankill Graveyard or for Balmoral Cemetery or for Knock Breda. And for later deaths, it has the burials in Roselawn. So it's not complete. And you may well find that men who died in the Cregagh Colony, some might have been buried in Carnmoney, and there's another online resource for that. But some could have been buried in Hollywood or Bangor, and some could even be buried in Milltown Cemetery, and there's no online records for those. So we'll stay with Scarlett. So if we just put in Scarlett as the surname and Albert as the address, you can see we've got George Fleming and we've got Ellen. George Fleming's Scarlett was living at 3 Albert Drive. When he died, he was 69 years old, and he died on the 28th of November 1960, buried in Roselawn on the 30th of November 1960. You can also then look to see who else is buried in that particular grave. And there's only one other burial, and that's Ellen, who we know is his wife. And we can see that when she died in 1968, she was still living at number 3 Albert Drive. She was 73 years old. So whenever the occupant, the leaseholder died, or the rent holder died, his widow could stay on in the house. And you can then also use this to calculate back. If you started from this end, you could calculate back to see, I'm just going to put in George Scott. Sorry, I shouldn't have done that. We know it's recorded that he was 69 years old when he died in 1960. So then you could work back from 1960 back 69 years, would give you a putative birth year of around about 1891. So there's two ways to approach getting back to a birth. But bear in mind that 69 is the age that was given when he died, and that might not be his exact age. It could be out by a couple of years either way. So that's taken us through using a number of different sources to find out as much as we can about the family history before the war, his war service, and the family history after the war. Another facility which I use quite a lot is the British Newspaper Archive. This is a service that you have to pay for, so it's not free. There are some drawbacks to it in that it's not a very precise search. It works on the basis of an optical character recognition transcription of a scanned document. So quite often characters can be misinterpreted, especially if the underlying text is blurred or blotched or whatever. So sometimes you could find that the lowercase letter O is mistranscribed as a letter C, which would mean if you were searching for the word Somme, it might not find it because it interprets the text, which is Somme, as SCMME. If you put double quote marks around the phrase, it should search for that exact phrase. If you put a plus character in front of a word, it will, or in front of a series of words, it will search where all of the words are present in the search facility. I've set this to just look at records or hits from 1st of January 26 through to 31st December 1999. I've also restricted it to newspapers published in Northern Ireland. So we're still looking at Scarlet. So if I put in plus Scarlet, and as you can see, I've already pre-prepared this, and plus Albert Drive being in double quote marks, we'll get a number of returns. Family at war. So there's a bit of scandal in the community because what we have is, when I bring up this report, Ellen Gamble of Albert Drive had summoned a minor for assault at Ballymaconachie on 12th October. She also summoned Mrs. Ellen Scarlett of Albert Drive for using abusive language. On a third summons, Ellen Gamble summoned George Scarlett for assault. So obviously, not everything was hunky-dory in the community there. Looking at the death records or death notices, I'll just scroll this down. There we can see Scarlett, 28th November at hospital, George F., dearly beloved husband of Ellen Scarlett, funeral from his late residence, 3 Albert Drive. The employees of REME, which is the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers, workshops at Cregagh, deeply regret the death of the father of their esteemed colleague, Samuel Scarlett. So obviously Samuel Scarlett at this stage was in the army in the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers. So the BNA, British Newspaper Archive, on its own can give us details of when the occupant died. So You can see that George Scott, 3 Albert Drive, was suspended for or was convicted of the same offence. So he was convicted of some sort of driving offence. So you get the good and the bad in there. Another of the occupants was Angus McGugan, spelled MacGougan. He was the original occupant of 16 Hamel Drive, but from 1932 to 1960, he was the occupant of 20 Hamel Drive. So he had moved house, but why? Well, hopefully these records will help us to look at that. So I'm going to put in McGugan and Hamel. So we've got John McGugan, so that's not him. So, but that could be a son. So we're getting a lot about McGugan. Let's look at this one. And this is a death notice for Barbara, the eldest and dearly beloved daughter of Angus and Elizabeth McGugan, funeral from her parents' home, 20 Hamel Drive. So obviously they lost a daughter at a relatively young age. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to then make it Angus McGugan. So plus Angus, and I'm going to take off the Hamel Drive bit. So you can see that when you're doing these searches, you have to flicker around with different bits and pieces. So here we've got Angus McGugan mentioned. When it comes up. And you can see that in October 1929, Angus McGugan is the secretary of the British Legion at their premises on Montgomery Street. So that tells us in 1929 what his occupation was. In 1924, where's 1924 gone? Right, these are coming out of order. I mean, I know that from looking at these before that in 1924, oh, sorry, that's 1928. We look at this one. Oh, come on. We can see that this was non-payment of rent, Belfast ex-servicemen houses. So as I mentioned last week, the ISSLT were not particularly accommodating when men fell behind in their rent. You can see that an order for possession was granted in the case of Angus McGugan of 20 Hamel Avenue. Notice it's misspelt. So we know that in 1928, Angus was in danger of being evicted. We also know that in 1929, he was now working for the British Legion. So we can draw a conclusion from that, that he had been given employment by the British Legion to enable him to stay in his ex-serviceman's house. Going to look again at the death or the burial records, and just going to look at McGugan, and I'm going to look at Hamel. So what we're getting here is we're getting Barbara McGugan dying at 20 Hamel Drive at the age of 19. That's the daughter. When we look at the grave section and number, it will give us the details of who else is buried in that plot. So we've got William, died in 1921 at 4 weeks, Elizabeth, who died in 1980, and Angus, who died in 1966. And you can see that in this one, Hamel is misspelt. So I'm not going to go on and belabor the point, But I just want to do a couple more searches on the British Newspaper Archive. And I'm going to search for 18 Bapalm Avenue. So you can be as precise as that. You can put in 18 Bapalm and spell it correctly. And one of the records that comes up is this one here. Which is an advertisement for the sale of 18 Bapalm Avenue. N Terrace Property Office's superb potential. There's ample room for extension subject to plans. And although the property is in need of some modernisation, we feel that it should appeal to a young married couple especially. Entrance hall, lounge, kitchen, bathroom, separate WC, 3 spacious bedrooms, large gardens to front, side and rear, space for a garage. So they've got a photograph of the house as it was in 1980 when it was being put up for sale. So that's where I'm going to bring this part of the presentation to a swift conclusion for a number of reasons. First of all, I'm afraid I need to go to the toilet. So talk amongst yourselves for a minute.
Has anyone used any of those resources before? Wendy, you know, you've done a lot of genealogy, and Gillian, Hazel, Emily. Well, I hope that you thought I had, because I pretty much forced us into it last year. So.
I was doing key sources for genealogy this afternoon with Prony.
Brilliant.
And they covered similar things. I didn't, a couple of sites I hadn't known, including one called Griffith's Valuations.
Oh yeah.
Which is very interesting, because my brother's away researching it at the minute.
Griffith's valuation is so interesting. I had heard of Griffith's valuation, which is, for anyone who hasn't heard, so it was done around like from about 1854 to about 1864, and it's basically a list of people who are paying rent to somebody else and people who are getting rent paid to them. But after that, there's actually further tithe allotment books that go on for years and years that are accessible online at Prony. So I only found out about that last year as well, which is brilliant. So I was able to like follow some people a little bit further as they moved around the country, because of they were paying rent to people. So that's a good one. Yeah.
It's the kind of thing that you get really hooked on. You know, you'll start and then think, oh, where did the day go? Because it's very, very easy. And you feel a sense of accomplishment because you go back and, you know, I mean, with me, it's just been my family, but it's been great.
I think we all have been down all those rabbit holes, haven't we, Wendy?
Yeah.
In the last few years.
Well, you see, I always thought it was the Scots coming over around 1900. And then I found as I went back, it was actually, we went over to Scotland 100 years before that. So yeah, it's great fun.
Yes.
We were just having a chat there about Emily had been doing the Prony course earlier today. So she's had like a double bumper of resources. So it'll be well ingrained now, Emily. And talking about Griffith's valuation as well as another resource from a bit earlier.
Yeah, I personally, I don't tend to go that far back, because my main area of interest is the Great War and Second World War. So I'll go back to the births, marriages and deaths, but I tend not to try and get stuck into the likes of the revaluations or the valuation stuff. I don't know how you want to work this. There's quite a few comments or questions on the...
Yeah, most people then they had to go, so we're not too bad. So there was one question from Angela before she went, and I don't know if you know this, Nigel, but I said I would check with you. Do you know if there's a register for the enumerators of the 1911 census?
I don't.
No, I hadn't heard of that either.
What I do know is that the enumerators were all policemen.
Yes, I'd heard that recently. So maybe the police museum actually might be a resource for that.
To be honest, I don't think so. I think that if there was a register, it would have been dispensed with because it wouldn't really be of much interest.
Much like the 1922 census, the 1921 census, which was.
Well, I think it was lost because the law courts in Dublin were bombed.
Yeah.
It was recycled to make
Ration card.
yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Make what?
What was that?
Ration
It's recycled to make
Oh,
the
ration
ration
cards.
cards.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay, so right. Oh, Alison has a horsey connection too.
What connection?
A horsey connection. Her grandfather was in North Irish Horse, and then the Hussars. Thomas Scott. That's all she knows. So, well, that's
Right.
maybe that's an opportunity for you to have a wee look up.
I'll just try and help out on that one. If I go back to the share screen, there's an excellent website called the North Irish Horse in the Great War. I'm assuming that she's referring to North Irish Horse.
Yes. I've got his number, Nigel. That's all.
Right. Well, if you go on to North Irish Horse, this website, northirishhorse.com.au, was it Thomas Scott?
Yes.
And there's a search facility on that. If you just type in Thomas Scott, now there's quite a few here. Do you know his number?
1468.
1468. Right. I'm going to take a chance on it being this top one. Was he from Banbridge?
No. Cregagh. Everybody I know is from Cregagh. Around about.
Was he First World War? Yes.
Yes.
Right. Oh, hang on. If you go onto this website and just play around with it, you may well, let's just see if I can find Scott. There's Scott William, Scott Henry. Unfortunately, it doesn't work on the basis of, well, actually, it does work on the basis of numbers. Sorry, what am I talking about? Right, let's go back. Sorry, I'll just hum along to myself here. Roll call. What was his number again?
1468.
1468. He, Philip Tardif has these broken down by bunches based on the enlistment dates. So he should be in the 959 to 1500, which means he enlisted between beginning of August 14 and April 1915. So 1496.
1468.
1468. I was just testing. Okay, so there we have.
And now you know I was listening.
There we have Thomas Scott. The background of this North Irish horseman is not known at present. That's a good start.
That's a good.
It does tell us that he enlisted in the North Irish Horse between those dates. He later became the Corps of Hussars. Remember whenever I was going through the material, I talked about the North Irish Horse being dismounted. The men who stayed in the cavalry went into the Corps of Hussars. So basically, a lot of the cavalry regiments were all amalgamated together. Some of the men stayed as cavalry, going into the Corps of Hussars. Others went into infantry. Trained at Antrim, went to France on 17th November 1915, and that was in the 33rd Division. June 1916, he moved into the 6th Inniskilling Dragoons Service Squadron. So there's a wee bit of information. It's also saying that it's likely that he was posted to the 8th King's Royal Irish Hussars and was later posted to the 19th Royal Hussars the Queen Alexandra Zone. Transferred to the Class Z Army Reserve on 28th April 1919. So there's a wee bit of information there.
Right. Okay.
Not as much as I had hoped.
No, but it's a start.
Yeah. Or even if you go onto that page or onto that website and email Philip, he'll try and help you out. He is very, very amenable to helping people.
Right. It's just that, you know, he told tales of being at the Somme, but my granny used to imply that more people survived the war than he said, because he met them every Friday night in one pub or another.
Yeah.
But the tales he told about going in and bringing the bodies out at the Somme, I don't know were they actually at the Somme. So I'll start with that site.
The North Irish Horse, depends what he means by the Somme, first of all, because
yes,
people tend to think the Somme 1st of July. I just need to let my cat into the kitchen now. But there was fighting at the Somme in 1917 and 1918 as well. The North Irish Horse were involved in the main Battle of the Somme in 1916, but just what their roles were, I couldn't say. But you never know.
His role was to go in at night with the horse and the carts and bring the dead bodies out and bring the dead bodies during the night from no man's land. That's what he said his job was.
Oh dear.
Yeah, to be honest, that doesn't sound like the sort of job that would be given to cavalry.
No, I didn't.
It sounds more like the sort of job that would be given to the Army Service Corps or the Labour Corps. But
well, who knows? I mean, he was the patrolman at Harding Memorial, and he did used to tell wee boys there were monkeys down Danny Winker's lane and send them all down looking for them. So, sometimes I think people who were in the war tried to make light. They didn't talk about the seriousness of it, so they.
Yes. Well, I'll tell you. I was giving a talk once, and there was a lady said that her grandfather or whatever had been awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal, but she didn't know what it was or what it was for. And it seems that every year, come remembrance, he would bring out his medals to polish them. And this lady, as a youngster, would say, "What's that one for?" And he said, "Oh, I got that one for peeling spuds." Now, a Distinguished Conduct Medal is one step down from a Victoria Cross.
Yes, yes.
And I was then able to find the citation for what he had done, of the reason why he had been awarded that gallantry medal. But it's partially the self-deprecating attitude of Ulstermen is, I didn't do much, we were just there and we ran about it.
Yeah.
There's other people who would blow up their stories. There's a famous guy, not famous, infamous maybe, in Hollywood, who used to, in the pubs, he would talk about his war service and so forth. But whenever a researcher was looking at his battalion, he found out that he'd been discharged within 3 months of enlisting and had never left Ireland, let alone. And yet he was telling people how he fought at the Somme, and he was at Messines, and he was at Ypres, and all this stuff, and he had never left Ireland. Anyway, don't want to put anyone down.
A few more questions. Julie's asked, you have to pay to use the Ancestry site. Yes, you can have different levels of membership for that, Julie. I have mine, and I think it's about £13 a month, something like that. But if I remember correctly, when Prony is accessible to the public, I think you can access it for free in Prony. Is that right?
I'm not sure about Prony, but I do know that you can access it for free at the libraries. So all the public libraries that have computer terminals, you should be able to access Ancestry. Now, what you might find is that they will restrict the amount of time you can spend on it, because a lot of the libraries would have limited numbers of computers, and I can't have somebody sitting there for a solid 8 hours. Central Library in Belfast also has them.
Well, I know that Peter regularly gets kicked out of Hollywood Arches Library for being on the.
Peter should get kicked out of libraries just for being Peter. Oh, he's gone. he's left us now in oh no, he's still there. He's just hiding.
So So Julian's asked, how can you find out where a relative fought? Would that be going back to their military records and their theatre of war?
The medal index card will tell you what the first theatre of war a man went to, but it won't tell you the subsequent theatres of war. So, for example, you could have a guy who enlisted with the 6th Royal Irish Rifles, which was part of 10th Irish Division. They served initially at Gallipoli, and then at Salonika, and then at Palestine. But if a man was with the 6th Rifles, got wounded, was sent home to the UK to recover, when he was fit to go back to active service, rather than sending him all the way out to Salonika, they may have just sent him to a different unit in France. So the medal index card won't help you that much. The service record, if it has survived, will record, depending on what papers have survived, will record his different engagements, and it would also record the different theatres of war that he was in. So, for example, if you remember whenever I showed you the military history record, where it said at home, France, home, you could have some where it says home, France, home, Salonika, home, or different variations on that. As to what particular battles a person was involved in, you can never be 100% correct. You might have a man who is a member of, say, the 8th Battalion Royal Irish Rifles, Ulster Division, and you think, he was in France from, say, October 1915. You cannot assume that he definitely took part in the 1st of July offensive. You can assume it's possible, but you could find that he took sick on the 20th of June and was in a hospital in Bologna on the day of the Somme offensive. The battalion...
I have another ignominious family story. Another ignominious family story from the war, in that my aforementioned 3 times great grandfather's brother was at the Somme, but he got sent home for having diarrhea.
Oh dear.
Well, it's bad enough with the mud, but the fact is that you can't make assumptions that because somebody was with a battalion that fought on the 1st of July, that person fought on the 1st of July. Because they might have been injured, they might have been wounded, they might have been on a temporary assignment to another battalion or another regiment. Unless you've got something a document which says he was wounded on the 1st of July, and then you can make that assumption. So I was going to say the battalion war diaries can be useful, but battalion war diaries very rarely mention other ranks by name. So, for example, at the end, on the 2nd of July, the battalion war diary would give details of the number of men who were killed. For the officers, it would name them, but for the other, so it maybe let's say for the 7th of June 1917, 2nd Lieutenant Hamilton, 2nd Lieutenant Johnston, and 20 men were killed. The 20 men aren't named because, well, they're only men, they're not officers, they don't count.
And we know the name of the captain that he served with. He wrote him a recommendation, a character reference on that, right. And he said he knew him for his continuous service during the war from 1915 to 1918. Would it be worth looking at his records? He was a horseman, it said. So we think he maybe looked after the horses that the captain was riding. He was
quite possible. It's quite possible. The officers' services records are generally available on the National Archives, but a lot of them haven't been digitized. And the National Archives, being a stingy bunch of people, charge. Now, I once got quoted to get a service record for an officer transcribed or digitized, and they were going to charge me 150 quid.
Wow.
And they wouldn't even tell me how many pages that would be or what the pages were. So you could find that in an officer's record, a lot of the pages are maybe just his exchanges with his bank, telling him to pay money to so-and-so, which are not of an awful lot of use. Some records have been digitized, but the thing that really annoys me about National Archives is if you pay them to digitize a record for you, they'll then make that record available to everyone else for free or for £3.50, which means they're getting paid sort of twice for it. It's a rip-off, but then that's neither here nor there. So, but whether the officer's record would record any details of the men under his command, I don't know. I don't think it would do, apart from maybe if he was making an official recommendation, then there might be a handwritten letter from him saying, so-and-so did a great job or whatever. So that probably...
Yeah. We also have his certificate of employment during the war, but it tells you nothing. You know, it doesn't say which regiment he was in, but we know he was when he moved from the 9th, or it was renamed the 9th Royal Inniskilling Fusiliers, and then it was the 11th Royal Inniskilling Fusiliers.
Yeah, a lot of the battalions amalgamated with losses and with no men coming through from the reserves. So, for example, the 8th and 9th battalions of the Royal Irish Rifles were amalgamated. The 11th and 13th battalions were amalgamated. And I think it was the same with the Inniskillings. So if he was Inniskilling Fusiliers, it might be worth contacting the Inniskillings Museum.
Okay.
Because they have records that are not necessarily available elsewhere.
Right.
They have a trace a relative service. So if you Google Inniskillings Museum trace a relative, that will give you the link through.
Okay.
But it sounds like you've probably already got quite a bit of information on him.
Well, we'll have his medals, we'll have his number, and with the certificate of employment in the war, and we've got the war records medal record,
Right.
which gives the date of the qualifying date.
Yeah. Have you searched the service records and discharge records?
Don't think so.
Right.
What are they with?
They're on Ancestry. If you can send the details through to Lisa, nearly forgot your name. If you can send the details, his name, his number, through to Lisa, she can then send it on to me, and then I can have a look, and then I can feed it back to you via Lisa.
Okay.
Would that be okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Because the other thing is, when he was discharged, there might be a pension card for him. So again, I can look for that, and that would also maybe indicate whether he was regarded as having a war-related disablement, which doesn't necessarily mean the loss of a limb. It could just be if he had a gunshot wound to the arm, it might have affected the use of his hands, which then could affect his potential for employment. We're losing numbers rapidly here.
It's got late, and yes.
Thank you.
So there's one last question in the chat, which should be a wee quick one. So Jacqueline's asked, is Knockeden near Rosetta, was it built as ex-servicemen's houses?
Knockeden near Rosetta, not that I'm aware of. The only one over that side that I'm aware of would be the ones that I mentioned, the post-Second World War ones, which were built at Mount Merion. There is ones not at Rosetta, but at Barnett's Road, off Barnett's Road, which were built after the Second World War. But certainly I don't think any were built in that area between the two wars. The closest between the two wars would probably be Clara Avenue in Bloomfield, which isn't that near. There were also ones built at Enid Parade in Ballyhackamore. Was that Jacqueline Gray that asked that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's call it a night. That was brilliant, and lots of new resources and new ways of using resources. Actually, I found, Nigel, I have picked up loads of tips about using different search techniques to be a bit more accurate.
Well, I think the important thing is to know how each of the systems that you're looking at works, how it works. The British Newspaper Archive I found to be fantastic. It can be incredibly frustrating.
So I didn't know about this plus and doing quotation marks. So
it's not exact, but it can help narrow it down. And the thing is, you can put in as many of those pluses as you like, but you've got things like, you might have somebody Samuel, but it might be in the newspaper as Sam. So rather than putting in Samuel as a whole name, just put in Sam. But it can be very useful, but it can be damn frustrating. Really, I mean, you can tear your hair, but you can say the same, the census, some of the transcriptions, you're looking at, how on earth did they get that?
Well, actually, we came up against this a couple of years ago, Nigel, when we were looking for one of my great uncles, who was named Daniel, but is transcribed as David in the census. This is a mistranscribed.
I've seen James transcribed as Jane, but then recorded as being a male. I saw one record where everyone in the household had the same forename, but they all had different surnames. Because they'd got them in the wrong column. And whoever was doing the transcribing just never thought that, well, that's a bit strange, only in an Indian accent, sorry to be racist. But you've got that where transcribers don't apply common sense. And then that filters right the way down, and people can end up, I mean, I've seen some absolute howlers. There was one I saw where, what was it? I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was like, how on earth do you get that?
Yeah. So you have to use a bit of common sense and a bit of imagination when you're searching sometimes.
Yeah. The thing that annoyed me about census is nobody seems to have looked at it or done any spot checks on it.
You can, if you come up against something that's being transcribed,
Yeah.
yes, but I don't think anybody ever fixes it.
I have submitted numerous ones, and you never get it. But Belfast City Council burial records can be just as bad. There's a man, or there was a man called Sir Daniel Dixon, who you may have heard of, and he was a baronet. And a common contraction of baronet was BART. Okay, so on the burial register form, it has Sir Daniel Dixon, BART. His surname has been transcribed as Bart. And when you search the Belfast City Council burial records for surname BART, you get all these men coming up who are Sir Daniel this, Sir Thomas that, Sir whatever, because the transcribers just didn't know that BART was not a surname, it was a title, it was an information as to his position in society. Although why you would put baronet on the burial register anyway is it's a bit pretentious, really, isn't it? It's like putting registering a death and saying Lisa Jones, so I'm not confused, BSc. You wouldn't do it.
No.
Well, some people probably would.
I use any excuse to like shove my letters in there,
Well, thank you very much indeed, Nigel. It's really been very good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right. As I said, if anyone wants to transfer information to Lisa, she'll send it on to me and I'll feed it back to you if I can find anything.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Good night.
Night.
Bye.
Night. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.